called Balloons Over Broadway. It is by Melissa Sweet. Okay, it was a Caldecott Honor winner, which means it got an award for the pictures. All right. Now, this is based on a true story. It is the story of the puppeteer of the Macy's parade. Shows you how they're putting together the puppets. Balloons Over Broadway, the true story of the puppeteer of Macy's parade. Written and illustrated by Melissa Sweet. Every movement has a meaning of its own. Quote from Tony Sarg. There is Anthony Tony Frederick Sarve. From the time he was a little boy, Tony loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he made a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without ever leaving his bed? He rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. That night he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. Okay. Number 1, he spread the feed the night before. 2, he pulls the rope. 3, the door opens and the chickens come out. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope, the door to the chicken coop opened, and the chickens had their breakfast. Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad was so impressed that he never made Tony do another chore. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and strings, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionettes' movements so lifelike that they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread that Tony's amazing marionettes. When Tony moved to New York City, Tony's sang marionettes began performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters, then attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. Macy's Wondertown. In Macy's Wondertown windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long, they were performing to shoppers jostling for a better look. But Macy's had an even bigger idea in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants, and as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony was an immigrant too, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on the street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's even arranged to bring bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day in 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a delightful parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Each year, the parade grew, but when Macy's brought in lions and tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled, and they frightened the children. Macy asked Tony to replace the animals. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up the city streets? Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, a perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how would Tony make his big puppets move? Then Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creation, some as big as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the avenues, propped up with wooden sticks. But now the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows really got to see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground, and though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted the balloons to be air-like, to articulate, to move and gesture, move like the puppets. But how? With the marionette, the controls were above and the puppet hung down. But what if the controls were below and the puppet could rise up? During the next year, Tony had set his new idea into motion. This time he asked the company in Ohio to make the balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than a rubber alone. Most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled with not just air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. Tony did not know if everything would go as planned. It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down with sandbags. By 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then one by one, Tony cut the lines of the sandbags. Let's have a parade. There they go. And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose up into the sky. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sailed down Broadway. They shimmered and swayed through the canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New York would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York City to see what new balloons would rise to the skies for Macy's fabulous parade. Tony Sang, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage, with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it could be. And the story from the author. Here comes the parade. There was an advertisement. Balloons over Broadway. The story of the puppeteer and Macy's Day Parade.